Today the LNP is calling on the state Labor government to be upfront about the true extent of police numbers here on the Gold Coast. We know that across Queensland there are 202 fewer police over the last 12 months. And we only know that because under the glare of estimates, finally we got a straight answer after months of posturing from the Minister. But to know that it's taking brave officers at the front line at places like here at Southport to come forward and bell the cat on how bad things really are shows that the government is more intent on keeping their image protected than protecting the community. It shouldn't be for frontline officers to have to bravely stand forward to tell how bad things are. It shouldn't be for the community to have to wait for hours for service because there just simply are not enough police. We know that there are fewer police across Queensland, and that has real life implications for people every day. It means that when you pick up the phone in your hour of need, there may not be a blue uniform available to come and help you. It means that when you go to the counter to get assistance, you may have to wait hours on end, and that's not the fault of the police officers, it's not the fault of the administration staff, it's the fault of a government that just cannot plan properly. We have fewer police in Queensland, we have weaker laws. Is it any wonder we're in the middle of a youth crime crisis? And again overnight we have seen scenes from throughout the state that shouldn't be part of a modern Queensland. Young crims using a park as their own racetrack, burning cars out on the streets. It's almost like it's just business as usual. And Queenslanders are asking, how on earth have we got to this situation where those kind of images are just the new norm to wake up to on a Saturday morning? That shouldn't be the case. We need more police, we need stronger laws, we need better early intervention, we need to deal with the youth crime crisis. And it's time for the state government to admit it. Admit that we are in the midst of a youth crime crisis, admit there are fewer police and tell us how many more and what is the plan to deal with that. And let's get on top of an issue that Queenslanders quite rightly have had enough of. Over to you, Rob.
Thanks, David. Well, the Southport Police Station, which you can see behind us, is one of the busiest police commands in the state, but sadly it's also one of the poorest in terms of resourcing. I've had officers come to me with copies of rosters, with other documentation showing that where there should be 90 to 100 police tasked to serve this particular station, there have been rosters where less than half the available officers have actually been available for service because of stress leave, because of annual leave, and also because of unfilled vacancies. I've repeatedly called on the Minister to provide information about police numbers, and for the last 3 years what we've seen in every response through the Parliament when I've asked those questions, the numbers are going down. And so the question is, where are these police going? Why isn't the Minister committed to properly resourcing this police station? This community are afraid. I've spent quite a bit of time door knocking the electorate in the last couple of months. Just a couple of weeks ago I was in Ashmore and I met with a group of residents in a townhouse complex, and on one night 3 motor vehicles were stolen from their complex. The keys were stolen from within their apartments or their townhouses while they were asleep, and you can understand that those community members were living in fear and happened to be, when I came upon them, they were actually in the car park discussing options to make their complex more secure. They were talking about getting quotes for security cameras, and this is a complex that's been there for 30 or 40 years, and now those residents don't feel safe to live in their own homes any longer. Just last Tuesday I was in Southport door knocking, and I started chatting with a gentleman in the street about youth crime, about how he felt about the area, and within about 5 minutes 4 or 5 other residents actually came out to join the conversation, and the number one message from all of them is that they're afraid in their own homes. It's simply not good enough, and the continual lack of resourcing here at Southport is appalling. This Labor government seem to be more concerned about their image and their protection than the protection of our community, and the officers here, while they do a great job, are absolutely stretched. They look after, they've got responsibility for the watch house, they have responsibility to provide a service to one of the largest policing commands on the Gold Coast. They're the first responders to issues and incidents at the Gold Coast University Hospital, and they're also required to front up at the courts when there's the need for extra safety or extra protection.
Good on you, Rob. Thanks very much, Rob. Over to you.
So how do you think the state government should address this? Is it they have to admit there's a problem first?
Yeah, admit there's a problem, strengthen the laws to tell officers that you got your back, and then value the ones that we've got and attract the new generation. But right now there are fewer police than 12 months ago, and when we speak to police at the front line, they tell us that they've never felt more battered, broken, bruised, undervalued, and the laws aren't there to allow them to do the job, and as a result there are less of them doing the job. So the thin blue line keeps getting a little thinner, and the only people not willing to admit we're in a crisis are the people who have the resources at their disposal to be able to fix it, and that's the state government.
Where do you think we are right now with this youth crime crisis?
Queenslanders are telling me that it is one of the number one issues that is exercising their mind at the moment. And it costs them every day. It costs them in their feeling of safety, it costs them in their insurance premiums, and it costs them in their ability to be able to live a fulfilling life. And it's not just isolated pockets anymore. We are getting Queenslanders in every part of the state telling us what it is like in their homes, in their businesses, on the streets, and there are implications every day. So this morning there will be people who walk out to their front yard and the vehicle they need to be able to go and earn a living or take the kids to soccer won't be there. There will be parents who have to tell their children that their safe space that's been violated, it's okay to go back to. They're not easy conversations. And there is a direct link between people's hip pocket and their mental well-being when governments are weak on law and order.
The bail-in Stuart memorial is on tonight.
Yeah.
How hard is it for families?
Yeah, that's a family that's been through so much, and what they have done to keep the memory of that young man in our hearts and our minds is something that shows what great Queenslanders they are. And I know the deputy leader, who's also their local member, has done an excellent job comforting that family and telling them that the loss of that young man won't be in vain. And it's important that we do all we can to get on top of youth crime, because there are families who have their lives ripped apart because of weaker laws and fewer police.
If you were in power, what would you do to address the youth crime crisis immediately?
It starts with rewriting the Youth Justice Act. We absolutely have to have consequences for actions.
Reset that, sorry, one more time.
No worries. It starts with consequences for actions and rewriting the Youth Justice Act, removing detention as a last resort and allowing the magistrates to do their job, and gold standard early intervention. They're three things that we could do immediately. Of course, it also takes the blue uniforms to be able to do their job. And we absolutely have to reverse the decline in the number of police officers. We need to strengthen the laws, make sure that we can turn kids around, make sure that we can hold those accountable who are committing those crimes in the here and now, and we can do things to help make Queenslanders feel safe again.
Speaking to local police around the Goldie Patch over recent weeks,
Yeah.
they've spoken about the big recruitment campaign that the state government is undertaking,
Yeah.
including real big incentives for interstate police, but it doesn't appear to be working up to the standard or the goals
Yeah.
that it needs to. Is this a problem of government or a problem of the job market?
If officers feel like punching bags, if they feel like the government doesn't have their back, if they continually see laws weakened and they're unable to do their job, that's why they're leaving in droves. And right now the state government has a duty to not just to keep the community safe, but to actually allow police to feel empowered by ensuring that the laws are in place, that early intervention is there to turn kids around from that merry-go-round of broken crime. And we need to respect and value the ones we've got, attract the best and brightest, and give them the laws to be able to do their job.
What additional incentives for new recruits would you like to see?
Sorry.
Might get one more out of it.
You reckon there's another one left? Righto.
What additional incentives to get new recruits would you like to see?
We think everything should be on the table, but ultimately the greatest gift you can give is to tell officers that you've got their back, and that means having the laws to be able to do their job. And nothing is more frustrating for a police officer to see the same faces commit the same crimes night after night, and that's a direct correlation with the weak laws that are in place at the moment. And that is a direct correlation with the fact that we're not getting serious about early intervention to turn kids around before a lifetime of crime. And so we should look at everything. Everything should be on the table to make sure that we not just attract but retain our best and brightest in the Queensland Police Service. But one of the greatest gifts we can give them is the legislation and the tools to be able to do their job. And that's their frustration, and that's why they're leaving in droves.
Should they get a wage boost?
Everything should be on the table. And I think no one begrudges police being paid well because they do an amazing job. We also need to make sure we give them the tools to be able to do that job. And the watering down of laws 8 years ago have created a generation of untouchables, young repeat offenders who know that their rights are greater than the rights of the victim. And the police feel that as much as the community do. They've had enough, and they want the laws to be able to do their job.
There's been more reports of safety issues across CRR sites since one worker fell off at the Boggo roadside. Do you think this project needs a change of hands, a full reset?
Every worker deserves the right to be able to go to work, earn a living, and come home in one piece. And when it's a state government site, that means the state government has a duty, and that is so important. In the modern era, worker safety is absolutely paramount, and we need to do everything we can to allow people to come home in one piece.
And then moving on to double demerit points, do you think those involved in the double demerit bungle deserve compensation?
Well, I think a couple of things. Let me unpack the severity of this for a second. We're dealing with people who may well have lost their licence who shouldn't have, and think of the repercussions from that. So people have lost their licence who shouldn't. That might mean they can't get to their job. That might mean they can't keep a roof over their head. That might mean that there's direct implications on their family life. This is really serious. And it's the same minister again. It's on repeat. It's the same minister again. The same minister who used his emails to make sure that he couldn't be subject to RTI. The same minister who covered up a lazy $2.4 billion in cost overruns. The same minister who's presided after scandal after scandal. So I think there's a lot of Queenslanders today saying that the only person who should be losing their licence out of all of this is Mark Bailey losing the licence to be a minister, because it reaches the point that you need to have accountability, otherwise things just keep occurring. And I look at all of the blowouts that the minister's presided over. I've looked at failure after failure. Today we see him talking about Cross River Rail. Well, Cross River Rail has blown out in time. It's blown out in billions, and that means less money to be able to do things like put police in this station here to keep the community safe. That's the direct correlation of when a minister can't do their job. And ministers don't get held accountable in this government.
So do you think, and back to that, you do think drivers deserve compensation?
If someone has lost their licence and it had an implication on their life and they shouldn't have lost their licence, well, they deserve to be adequately compensated for that. That's a must. But there also has to be somebody held accountable. That's the way it works in Westminster system. You can't have the same person saying sorry on repeat and never getting better, because otherwise Queenslanders say, well, why do we have people in roles if you have a Premier who's not prepared to hold them accountable? There is a direct cost. There is a cost when projects blow out. It means you're unable to do things that Queenslanders need. And there is a cost if you have bungles that impact everyday people. And so I think there are a couple of things that need to occur. One is, if people were wronged, they deserve the right to be compensated, and ultimately somebody must be held accountable. And Minister Bailey can't continue to just skate on that thin ice and just keep on skating without any repercussions.
Often the explanation we get from the state government regarding the blowouts is labour shortages,
Yeah.
increasing cost of construction, that sort of thing. Do you accept that as an explanation, and what would it be done?
Well, I'll give you an example of why that excuse doesn't cut the mustard. On the Gold Coast, there are currently three train station programs, train stations that are as part of that program for Cross River Rail. 12 months ago, those stations were budgeted at 120 million. They are now 520 million. Now that's over 400%. You can't blame cost escalations, you can't blame the Ukraine war, you can't blame federal government in years gone by. That is a direct result of a government that can't project manage things properly. And if you don't have ministerial accountability, and if your ministers and your government are more intent on their political survival and managing the chaos and crisis, well then that's when projects blow out. That's when frontline services break down. And that's what Queenslanders are living through at the moment. And the constant excuses, the constant repeat of blaming everyone else but the state is wearing thin on Queenslanders who are really struggling to trust these guys at the moment. Thank you all. Thanks guys. Thanks for your time.